Now let's bring in Malcolm Davis, who joins me from Australia. He's a senior analyst in defense strategy and capability at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Thank you very much, Malcolm, for joining us here on TRT World. Now, over the past few days, we have seen indications coming from Moscow that it wants to negotiate the war in Ukraine. Does that suggest that the end of this war is drawing to a close?
No, in the sense that what the Russians want to do is to use negotiations or a negotiation process to generate a pause in the fighting, to give them time to regroup, rebuild and rearm their forces so that they can unleash a second phase of the war in coming months. They're not genuine about peace because when you look at what Putin and the Putin regime is saying, they're still insisting on Ukraine accepting Russian control of conquered territories in Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, as well as Crimea, obviously. And that they know is unacceptable to the Ukrainians, but that's their preconditions. And they also are expecting Ukraine to be demilitarized, which means that it would leave Ukraine completely vulnerable and open to the next Russian attack. So the Russians are not seeking peace.
And you don't see any possibility of Ukrainians meeting Russia's demands at any time soon, correct?
No, because if the Ukrainians were to meet those demands and essentially give up those territories, it's not just territory they're giving up, it's their people. The people in those territories would then be under Russian control, and they would be at the mercy of Russian forces. And we've seen what happens to the Ukrainian civilians in places like Bucha and Severodonetsk and other cities at the mercy of the Russians. The Ukrainians understand this very well. They're not just fighting for territory, they're literally fighting for their survival of their people. And so therefore they cannot afford to surrender their territory or agree to Russian demands. And why should they, after all? Because they have the upper hand at the moment. So I think it's important for the Ukrainians to have a diplomatic process with the West, but not to meet Russian demands.
Indeed, Malcolm, there is no way Ukraine is going to meet those demands by Russia, which perhaps indicates that in the near future we should not be expecting this war to end. Just recently, the Ukrainian Foreign Minister has said that they're going to hold a peace summit in February. What do you think would be the outcome of that summit? I mean, it will take place right when this war would mark its first anniversary.
Look, I think it's a good move because what it does is it seizes the initiative in the information war from Russia. Russia is currently using these suggestions of a negotiation process to try and divide Western states and undermine support for Ukraine. I think Ukraine going ahead with this peace summit in the United Nations neutralizes that effort and makes it clear that Ukraine is prepared to talk to Western European countries, to talk within the UN about its terms for peace. And those terms would be for the Russians to withdraw completely from Ukrainian territory, including Crimea, and also for Ukraine eventually to join NATO and to receive that protection from NATO under Article 5. I think that it's vital for Ukraine to seize the initiative in the information war to prevent Russia from exploiting that propaganda that they're using at the moment to try and divide Western countries and weaken support for Ukraine.
Malcolm Davis, thank you very much for talking to us here on TRT World. Really appreciate your taking out the time.